Hi there, good morning and a very warm welcome to the second of our Payroll Fast Start webinars, running through how to run your payroll with Sage 50 Cloud. My name's Duncan, I'm your trainer for today's session, and I'll be on hand to answer your questions as we go through the presentation and demo today. Content should take approximately 1 hour, and I will stick around at the end of the session if you have any final questions that you might want to save up for me. But do feel free to ask them throughout the webinar, as I will try and answer them as and when I see them. Okay, so let's now have a quick look at what we are going to cover in today's webinar. So we're going to begin with a bit of a checklist on preparing to process your payroll and some of the tasks you'll need to complete before you sit down to enter the employee's pay. We're then going to process the wages, so we're going to enter payment values, we're going to check some of the deductions calculated by the software, and I'm going to show you the pension assessment option that you may have access to if you subscribe to our pensions module. We'll then move on to payslips and reports, so printing the information you've just entered for your employees or hosting that information online, and reporting on your payroll for your own records. We're then going to complete the payroll process by marking anyone who has left as a leaver and then submitting a full payment submission to HMRC with all the details of that pay run. We're going to finish the session with some month-end tasks, a few things you do at the end of each tax month, not least how to make a payment to HMRC. And we'll also show you one of the submissions that you may need to make at the end of each month to report any adjustments to HMRC. So I'm going to begin by giving a little bit of context to all of the tasks we'll be completing in the software by referring you to some of the guidance published by HMRC. You can read this guidance following the link in your handout or at gov.uk/running-payroll. And it outlines the tasks that you need to complete on or before your employee's payday and some of the tasks to complete as you reach the next tax month. So as you can see, on or before the employee's payday, you will need to use payroll software to record their pay, including salary, wages, and any other payments, for example, overtime or bonuses. You'll need to calculate deductions from pay, like tax, national insurance, and pension contributions. You'll need to calculate employers' national insurance contributions on earnings above the relevant threshold, produce pay slips for each employee, and then report the pay and deductions in a full payment submission, abbreviated to FPS. So we're going to make sure that we've covered each of those points, and your Sage Payroll software will cover all of this and more, as will become apparent in the demo. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll look at those 3 tasks for the end of the tax month and how you kind of close off each period. So moving on to actually using the software, the first thing I'm going to do is take you through a bit of a checklist on preparing to process your payroll. Some of the things you may need to do before you actually sit down and enter the wages. So here are 5 tasks for you. Number 1, add any new starters that have joined the company since your last payroll. And I'm going to show you how to deal with starter forms when we go through the demo. Number 2, enter any absences that qualify for a statutory payment. And that includes maternity, paternity, or sickness absence. Number 3, set your process date. So we're recording the date that the employees will receive their wages, and that will determine the tax period for the calculations of tax and NI. Apply any tax code or student loan notices you've received from HMRC, and then select the employees that you want to pay in this pay run. So let's put some of that to practice in our first demo of the day. I'm just going to now share my other screen with you, where I am already logged into Sage Payroll. And if you came along to yesterday's webinar, we did a bit on navigation, and we're going to be focusing mainly on the payroll tasks today, which we will find in the tasks pane once we select the payroll option. But we can also follow along these steps by changing the view at the top of the screen and switching to the payroll process. So as you can see, that has split the main work area into the employee list and the process map. I can even adjust the size just so that I can see all of my employees. And then we've got some tasks that will be following left to right. as an alternative to following these tasks from top to bottom. So it's personal preference which option you use. The process map you may find easier if you're using the software for the first time. Right, so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new employee record for someone that has just joined this company. And we went through some of these steps in yesterday's session, but I do want to focus mainly on the starter forms that will be required, either a P45 or a starter checklist. But first, I'm going to share a top tip with you. If you'll be taking on an employee that will be doing the same role as an existing employee, so perhaps they're replacing someone that's leaving, or they'll have the same job title, for example. What you can do to save a little bit of time is you can select an existing employee record in your list to use this as a template for the new record. And then when you go to your employee tasks and use the employee wizard or the quick employee option, because you've got someone highlighted, you will see an option there to base the employee on the existing record and copy over some of the information. If I say yes to that message, it's not immediately obvious, but some of the settings have been copied from that original record. So for example, the department's in place, some of the pay elements are assigned, and we've got the pay frequency and pay method copied from that existing record. So I would just start by entering the employee's personal details, making sure that I enter it exactly as it appears on their official documentation, such as a passport. We're going to provide at least 2 address lines and the postcode. And then we can enter other contact details, including an email address if we're looking to use any of our online services to host payslips in the cloud or to email documents to your employees. So I'll just put an email address in there, which then opens up the option to enable online services. So I'll just complete the other personal details. Got the gender, marital status, and I'll just pop in the date of birth. And because we're taking on a new employee, we're just going to record the fact that we've conducted our right to work checks. And then if we want to, we can add further details of those checks by recording document details. In this case, the UK passport, and then the passport number recorded alongside that information. So we're then going to enter the employee's start date. In this particular case, it'll be the 11th of January. So they're not working a whole month for their first payment. So as you'll see a bit later on, we're going to do an adjustment to their pay. We can specify pay method and frequency if we need to change that, and we could enter bank details if we'll be using Sage e-banking or salary payments in order to pay the employee their wages. Now this section on the right-hand side is what I really wanted to focus on, and this is the starter form that you would receive from anyone that joins your business as a new employee. As you can see from this list, we've got an option for P45, and most new employees should bring a P45 with them. But if they don't have a P45 from a previous employer, you would choose the option for P46, which is the old name for what's now known as a starter checklist, which is a form that you get your employee to fill in that's provided by HMRC. Now in your handouts, I've put some links to the starter checklist and also a handy tool for working out the new employee's tax code, and a starter checklist for anyone that doesn't have a P45 looks something like this. So you get your employee to provide all their personal details, and you then ask them to choose an employee statement which describes their circumstances, and you ask them about any student loan or postgraduate loan that they are currently repaying. Now, another tip for you, even if you do have a P45, might be worth getting all new starters to fill in a starter checklist or similar form if you've designed your own, because you don't necessarily get the student loan details in full on the P45. And the employee statement as well is useful information to have on record. So it's used to be known as a P46, it's now a starter checklist. In my demo, I haven't got a P45, so I'm choosing P46, and the starting declaration that applied to my new employee was statement B, and it then assigns the relevant tax code based on that statement. So I'm going to quickly fill in the other details. Because they provided the national insurance number, we'll enter just there. The NI category for most employees will be category A, standard rate contributions. But if they're over state pension age, or if they're aged 16 to 20, they may be on a different category, either C or M. There was no declaration on student or postgraduate loan. I'm not going to assign a pension scheme at this point because we're going to do an assessment when we do the first payment for this employee to see whether they need to be put in our pension scheme. But the department's been assigned for us. We could add the job title, and I'm just going to quickly enter a gross salary amount, which I've entered as a yearly amount, and we can see the overtime payment has been assigned automatically. So just going to save those new employees' details using the save and clear option at the bottom. There's a quick reminder there to add contracted hours within the employee record in order to calculate our factor pay element, so the hourly rate for our overtime. And then you'll see that the new employee has been added to my list, employee 11, I should say, employee 11. And then what I will just do is go into their salary details, just pop in their contracted hours, 35 per week in this case. We can see there that the hourly rate for overtime has now been calculated, in this case at time and a half. So a bit of a refresher on creating new records, but it's that starter form, either a P45 or a P46, and do check out the links to HMRC in the handout for further help with that. So what we're going to do next is we're going to add some absence details to an employee. I have an employee who is starting maternity leave this month. So we're going to record those absence details in order to calculate their statutory payment. So the way I'm going to do that is by selecting the relevant employee. And then you'll see from the employee tasks, we have options to record sickness, adoption, maternity, or paternity. So I'm going to use the recording maternity option to enter details for her SMP. So I've received a MAP B1 certificate, that's a medical evidence required. And on that, we had the expected date of birth, which was the 5th of Feb. We just need to fill in the employee's last day of work. So officially their end date before maternity leave in this case was the 1st of January. And then when we know the details, we can add the actual date of birth and the employee's return to work date. And you'll see that the software will calculate the various rates of statutory maternity pay for them. So you can find more help with recording statutory payments in our help centre, but I just wanted to draw your attention to these employee tasks, which gives you an easy way of recording the relevant information for statutory payments. So I've got a new starter, we've entered some absence. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to come back to the payroll tasks, and I will just switch on the process map. And I'm going to set my process date so that we can set the tax period for our calculations and the payment date to be included in our submission to HMRC. So in this example, my employees are paid monthly and their pay date is the last day of the calendar month. So I can either use the task to change the process date, or I can use this first step in the payroll process map. And from here, I'm just going to choose the pay date. It should reflect the date that the employees receive their pay. And then if I click OK, that is my process date set. Fourth thing on my checklist was to apply any tax code notices. And if you receive your notifications online, you can actually retrieve them directly in your software. So notice here on the process map, there is a link to the IR secure mailbox, which allows you to check for online notices, or you could go to the e-submissions tasks, and you can open the mailbox from here, IR secure mailbox, where you then have an option for checking for new mail. So it'll then see whether you've received any tax code or student or postgraduate loan notices. And if there is anything new, there'll be a folder under HMRC mailbox that will then show you the relevant employee details, and you'll be able to open up that message and apply any changes automatically to the relevant employee. But as you can see in this case, I've got no changes to tax codes or student loans, so nothing in the mailbox. So I'll just jump back to my payroll tasks, pop that process map back on, and I can finish my prep by selecting the employees that I'm going to pay. Now, this is where it depends on how complicated your payroll is. You might be paying all of your staff at the same time, or you might have different pay frequencies, weekly and monthly, for example, or even different department groups that you want to process separately. So if you do have a larger payroll or multiple pay frequencies, this is where you can use the outline option, which makes it easy to select a specific pay frequency, monthly in my case, or weekly if I had weekly paid employees as well. And you can even drill down to further filters if I did want to enter information for one department at a time. So sales, service, casual, etc. Now, this is quite a simple payroll. I'm actually going to pay everyone at the same time. So I'm just going to go back to all employees, and then using these selection tools, I will clear the current selection, then click swap, and we then have everyone highlighted, ready to enter their pay. So that's me set up. Just going to whiz through that preparation checklist once more. So we've added the new starter. We entered some maternity absence. We set the process date to match our pay date, applied student loan or tax code notices, and then finally selected the employees we need to pay. So we are now ready to get down to the actual payroll tasks and start to enter some of that payment information. So in this next section, I'm going to take you through the most commonly used option to enter the payments, but I will mention some other features that you might use at the same time. And I'm also going to do a pension assessment, which is something you can do if you have our pensions module to help you manage automatic enrolment tasks. So let me just switch back to the demo. And you'll see I am still on my payroll tasks with the process map open. Now, before I go ahead and enter the payments, you will see there is an option to reset payments, both here in the process map and the payroll tasks. And that gives you a way of setting values either to 0 or to default values before you actually enter the employee's pay. So you might want to use this option if you have a lot of variable payments, if you have hourly paid employees where the hours vary each time, or perhaps if you have bonus payments where the bonus amount changes each pay date. And it's pretty simple to use. You would go into the reset payments option. You would choose the option to selectively reset rather than clearing all data. And then that gives you the option of working through the different pay elements that you've set up, where I might want to set my overtime hours to be cleared, and I might set my bonus rates to be cleared as well. So it's entirely optional. You can do something similar with deductions that you might have set up. And then when you complete this reset payments wizard, it'll make the changes that you have just specified. So what we'll now do is we'll go into the enter payment screen, which you can see is the next square along in our process map, or it's one of the next tasks in the payroll tasks. I'm being prompted to check for any updates to legislation, which I could do a quick check if I want to. And there were no legislation updates found. And that will then bring me into the payment screen, listing the first employee that I selected, which in this case is Miss Employee 1. So the first thing you'll see is the payments tab. And if you've entered salary details, there'll be a salary payment assigned here automatically, and then any additional pay elements that you've added in the employee record. So the salary is a fixed payment, so it has 1 as the hours on number, and the rate is the amount of pay. Overtime is an hourly payment, so we would enter the number of hours that we want to pay them for. In this case, it's 7.5. And then bonus payments, another example of a fixed payment. So one at £250, for example, if they're getting a £250 bonus. You can see at the bottom of the screen, it keeps a running total of the gross pay and the deductions for tax and national insurance. You can see the employee's take-home pay or net pay shown at the bottom of this screen. And you can go through the other tabs if you have deductions, attachment of earnings orders, loan repayments, or if you need to add any sickness details to calculate statutory sick pay. And then we have a summary tab, which is a useful place to check other deductions such as pension contributions and student and postgraduate loans if that applies to your employee. So we can see there's been a pension deduction calculated. And we can check the employer contributions if we want to, clicking this employers button. There's an information tab which gives you all of the figures involved in the calculations, which could be printed if you needed to. And there's even a section to keep notes, which can be populated and reported on by the history tab of the employee record. So if you're happy with the payment values entered, to move on to the next employee, you can click Save/Next. So a similar deal for this next employee. They have a fixed salary. I could enter bonus amounts if needed. And I'll just show you, I do have a deduction assigned to this employee, and it's a salary sacrifice deduction for a childcare voucher scheme that the employee has joined. So we've got that salary sacrifice of 243 being taken from the employee's gross pay. And again, we can see the summary to check pension contributions and anything for student and postgrad loans. Now moving on to my third employee, you might remember that I selected this employee when I set up the new one, because this employee is actually leaving us this month. So we need to do something slightly different to enter their final pay. Now, as you can see, their salary has come up, and this represents a full period, in this case, a full month. But this employee is actually leaving before the end of the month. So it means that I need to do a manual adjustment to reduce that salary amount. Now, it's up to you how you calculate the part period salary. The way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to look at the number of working days in January, and I'm going to count up the number of working days I need to pay them for. And I'm going to do an adjustment to the hours or number value. And here's another quick tip for you. There's a calculator available. So I know that the employee will have worked, let's have a look, 16 days this month. So I'm going to use my calculator to do 16 divided by the 21, which is the total working days in the month. And that gives us the proportion of the month I'm paying them for, and it has reduced their salary accordingly. But there are other methods to working out part month's wages, and it is a manual process. You'll need to do that yourself. Also with a lever, there's a checkbox you can select at the bottom of the screen to indicate that this is their final payment. And that can give you some useful reminders about potential outstanding payments or other tasks that you need to complete. So if I tick the box for this employee, it actually tells me that there is an outstanding attachment order, and we're going to need to notify the creditor as appropriate. And it gives me a message saying I will need to update my records to ensure tax and NI values are correct, and then process lever details before making the FPS. So I'm going to show you that a little bit later on in the demo. So don't forget other potential payments, things usually paid in arrears like overtime, bonuses, or perhaps outstanding holiday pay. And just to show you, this is the attachment in force for this employee. It's for council tax, and this will be the final deduction that we make, and we'll let the authority know that the employee has moved on. So basically, we would continue through the enter payments routine for each employee. Employee 4, you might remember, was the employee on maternity leave. So if we take a look at the summary, we've actually got statutory maternity pay calculated automatically. I will need to adjust the salary as appropriate. So it depends whether we're making up to their full wage or whether we only want to pay them for any days that they're due to be paid this month. And if you are making up to their full pay, you can actually enter the full salary amount. And on the summary tab, there's this make up basic option, automatically reduces it by the amount of statutory pay. So that's what I've done for this employee. Still getting the normal pay amount, but most of it is made up of statutory maternity pay. So I'm just going to save the default values for the next few employees. And as I get to employee 8, this employee is paid slightly differently. They're on an hourly rate because they don't have fixed hours. So I'm just going to enter the hours that they've worked this period. So the hours for the month, effectively. And finally, I have my new starter. And again, it has worked out a full month's salary for them. So for this month, because they started after the beginning of the month, again, I'll do manual adjustment. 15 out of the 21 days is what they'll have worked. And that is the amount of pay I'm going to be giving them. So once you've saved all of the payments, you can close the enter payment screen. You'll see that the last calculated column now shows the 31st of January pay date. And I can then move on to my next step, which will be to run a pension assessment. If you have our pensions module, to check for any auto enrolment activity that we may need to complete. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. You'll also find pension assessment from the process map. It'll prompt me to take a backup first. Whenever you get a backup prompt, I strongly recommend that you take a backup at that point, in case you want to return back to this point to correct a mistake, for example. But I'm just going to skip past that in this demo. And what we should then see is the employee's pension status. So whether or not they have been previously auto-enrolled, any pension scheme that's assigned to them, and the category of worker that they fit into. So they're either eligible to be automatically enrolled or they're not. And you can get more detail on how they've been assessed just by hovering over the spyglass. So it tells you what they're earning, what their age is, and when they were first auto-enrolled. So to be eligible for auto-enrollment, you need to be aged between 22 and state pension age and earning more than the equivalent of £10,000 per year, which is the earnings trigger. And you can see that many of my employees are eligible. And if I scroll right to the bottom, there's a little flag to tell me there's been a change. So I've got a new starter. They're being put into the pension for the first time. And then we do have options at the top to managing any opting in, opting out, or postponement of auto-enrollment here at the top. But I won't go into any more detail on this. You can read more about the pension assessment from our help center. I'm just going to close out of this screen, and that has assigned the pension scheme and taken the first pension contribution for my new starter. Right, so we'll take a quick breather at that point. We're kind of halfway through the pay run now. We're at the point where we've done the data entry. So let's just give you a bit of a recap of some of the things we saw in the enter payment screen. So in the main screen, you've got the various tabs that you can flick between to enter payments, deductions, attachments, loans, and to view that summary. You'll see the hours and rate columns for each of the various pay elements. So it could be a fixed payment where there's 1 in the hours or number, or it could be an hourly payment where you enter the number of hours. You've always got that summary bar at the bottom, giving you a breakdown of gross to net with the main statutory deductions. And once you're happy with all of the values entered, you would use that save and next option to move on to the next record. Another quick tip for you, if you're in the middle of a payroll and for some reason you need to access the employee record, maybe to change something, to check something, and you don't want to interrupt the flow of your payroll, you can actually jump straight into an employee record from the Enter Payment screen by using that employee icon, which you'll find in the top left corner. So it's a good way, if you forgot to perhaps add some details to the employee record, you can do that without having to start your Enter Payments routine again. Okay, so we will now move on to take a look at payslips and reports. So we're now at the point where we've entered all of the payment information, we've done our pension assessment, we're happy with the payments we've entered, but we want a way of checking them, and we also need to produce these payslips, which are a legal requirement to give to our employees. So let's take a look at the options for payslips first. There's a print option if you want to go old school. You can email payslips as secure attachments, or you can use our online payslip service integrating with Sage HR and host the payslips online for your employees to view that way. Now, a quick note about printing payslips. As of the 1st of January, we no longer directly sell stationery for the Sage software. You can still get Sage payslip stationery from third parties. So a quick Google search will find vendors for that stationery if you want it. But we encourage you to go down the sort of online route or use digital options such as the email payslip layout. So in the demo, I'm going to show you where to find the printable layouts. We'll also have a look at the process for uploading them online. And I will show you the payment summary reports, which are reports you keep for your own records, giving you an overview of the payroll information for that period. Right, so I'm going to jump back to the demo. Working our way through the tasks, the next thing in the list is the pre-update reports. So it's any report that you would run during your payroll process. And actually on the process map, you've got pre-update reports, but if you're only interested in payslips, there's a separate option which will only show you payslip reports as well. So let me go into pre-update reports to show you what it looks like. I'm just getting a reminder to do my pension assessment, which I've already done. This is the report browser, and it starts by showing you anything that you flagged as a favorite. So two favorites that I'd encourage you to add are the payment summary part 1 landscape and payment summary part 2, which we'll take a look at in just a moment. And then you've got the payslips folder underneath, where you can find the layouts that have been designed for payslips stationery, either for dot matrix printers or for laser printers. So if you've got stationery you want to print onto, just look at the description to see what matches the stationery you have. You've got the email option, and there's a little bit of setup you'll need to do in the employee record to email the payslips. And if you're going to upload, I'll show you how you do that on the next slides. So let's assume that we want to print some payslip information. I've just selected the standard laser payslip layout. The different output options are here at the top, so you can preview first, you can directly print, you can export as a PDF or various other formats. But if I do the preview, we can then take a look at the information on these payslips. So I'll just make that a bit bigger, zoom in a little bit for you. This is the payslip for my first employee, so you can see it lists the different payments here on the left-hand side. You've got the deductions for the current period. And note that the employer pension for this layout is shown within the deductions, but it's for information. This amount isn't deducted from the employee. It's actually put straight into the pension pot. And all of the payslip layouts will also have a year-to-date value section here on the right-hand side, showing them what they've earned in the tax year to date, as well as the all-important take-home pay or net pay here at the bottom. So similar for the other employees, got a salary sacrifice deduction shown as a negative value. We've got the parental pay for the employee on maternity leave. And then keep scrolling through. We've got some hourly payments down here as well. So basic pay has hours and an hourly rate. Now, if you're printing onto stationery, if you're still going down that route, just print from here. You can also export a copy, either for your own records or perhaps to then print out onto plain paper. So if you're printing it, it doesn't print any of the background, but if you export first and save it as a PDF, so I'm going to save this into a payroll reports folder I've created, January 2021 Payslips, I'll call it. I'll save it as a PDF, and that way I've got my own copy that I can look back on if I get any queries. And I also have a PDF that I can print, which will then print all of the background information, sort of the template behind the scenes as well. So I'll just show you where that's gone to. Now I've got a PDF. I could print that set of payslips, or I could look back on it should I need to for my own records. Now, while you're in pre-update report, you might want some reports for your own records, different report categories here on the left-hand side. BACS reports, if you're paying by BACS, it will show employee bank details and net pay amounts. Various analysis reports, if you want to report by department or cost center. And in the summary folder, these are the ones that I've favorited: payment summary part 1 landscape and part 2 landscape. A double click will give you a preview, another top tip. Part 1 gives you the breakdown gross to net, calling out any statutory payments. You've also got the pension deduction from the employee. So a good way of checking at a glance what your payroll looks like. And part 2 just gives some further information around the employer contributions. So employer NI, employer pension, as well as a record of the tax codes and NI categories that you've been using. So the reports complement each other. You can print them, you could export them as PDFs. You could even create a reports pack by setting up a reports selection, which will then run a set of reports all at the same time. But I've just got these 3 added to my favorites, and these are the ones that I'm going to use for printing or saving reports as PDF. So by doing that at this stage, you can check the information on the payment summaries and the pay slips, make sure you're happy with everything. And if you need to make any changes to the pay, at this point you can go back to the enter payment screen because we haven't finalized anything. But I will quickly run you through the process for uploading the pay slips. It's pretty straightforward. And there is a link in your handout for the full guide on the online services. So just jumping back to my slides for this bit. Can't give you a live demo, unfortunately. But if you've set up the online services option, you'll be able to use the option from your payroll tasks to upload your online pay slips, and that will then give you a summary, the gross and net pay values for each employee that you've set up. You then click on Publish Pay Slips, which will then push them to the Sage HR online service. You'll get a confirmation message that the pay slips have been published successfully. And if you were to access your online services as the employer, that'll give you the option of going into each employee's online account and checking the pay slips that you've uploaded for them. And you'll be able to sort of view that information. You can even download them if for some reason they can't get into the online portal and you wanted to send them the downloaded copy by email or something like that. So online payslips is an option. Email payslips is another way you could do it, or you could print either onto plain paper from a PDF or onto stationery if you want to do that. So what we're going to look at next is actually completing the payroll process, which is known as updating records. We're then going to process a lever, and we're going to show you how to do the full payment submission to report that information to HMRC. So at this point, I'm just going to jump back to the demo. So we've run our reports, we're happy with the values, we don't need to change anything. So next task I'm going to run is update records, which is also found on the payroll tasks. Just another reminder about pension assessments. If you're using our pensions module, you can switch these reminders off if you don't want to see them again. It tells me if we need to print any pre-update reports, do so before we update. Already done, so I'm going to click yes to continue, and that then takes me into the update records wizard. So this will update year-to-date figures such as tax and NI. It adds a historical entry for that pay run and automatically takes a backup of your data. But we do strongly recommend at this point you also take your own backup, because this will back up all of the information that you've just entered and checked, and it gives you a point to return back to should you need to make any corrections. So I'm just going to click next in the update records wizard. It tells me it's a monthly payroll with then 11 employees to be updated. And then it shows me the names of those employees. And if I click finish, it goes through and updates the records. It tells me that if I have any levers, I need to run the lever wizard next. And because I've processed statutory maternity pay, I'll need to complete an employer payment summary to HMRC. And that's part of my month-end task, which I'll be covering at the end of the webinar. Now, by updating the records, you'll notice that the last updated column now displays the 31st of January, which was my January pay date. If I go into the employee records, I now have history for that pay date as well. 31st of January is now in the history. And if I try to go back and make any changes, if I need to go back to enter payments, it tells me that we can't because we've already updated the records. And if we did need to go back and enter corrected values, we would need to use either the rollback option or we would need to restore a backup. So that's a payroll complete. And what we're going to cover next before we send the information off to HMRC is dealing with levers. All right, so when it comes to levers, the timing of the tasks is crucial. So you need to do things in a specific order in order to include the final payment in the employee's P45 and to include the leaving details in your submission to HMRC. So you saw earlier in the demo, we did an adjustment to the employee's pay because they weren't being paid for the full month. We ticked the box which reminded us that we need to tell the authority about the attachment order. And it might have reminded us about other outstanding items. Once we're happy with those final payments, we have updated the records. Really important to do that first. And then our next step is to run the lever wizard before we do a full payment submission. So what the lever wizard does is it enters the leaving date into the employee record and it gives you the option of producing the P45. So these days, P45s are printed onto plain paper. There still isn't an email option for this, as the guidance from HMRC says that it should be a physical copy that you give to your employee. So we're going to show you how to enter the leaving date and print the P45, and then I'll move on and take you through the full payment submission. Right, so if we have a look at the process map, you'll see one of the optional tasks after updating the records is to process levers. But if you're not following this, you'll need to run the lever wizard from the employee tasks on the left-hand side. So first and foremost, select the employee who is leaving. Really important you select the right employee, otherwise you'll mark either everyone as a leaver or the wrong employee as a leaver. I could either go into process leavers from here, or I would go to the employee tasks and I would select leaver. That takes me into a leaver wizard. When I click next, it's just a case of recording the leaving date, which was Friday 22nd of January. They're leaving tomorrow. And then we've got some reports that we can run. There are P11 deduction cards that you could run for your own records. That gives you the breakdown by each tax period of the employee's pay and deductions. But the one that you do need to print for your employee is this one, P45 plain paper. I'm going to do a preview. So obviously I can't show you a printed copy. And as you'll see, there are 3 pages to this report. There's part 1A, which is the employee's copy that they keep. Gives their details, leaving date, tax code, and the total pay and tax deducted. There's part 2, which goes to the new employer. So it tells them if student loan deductions are continuing, gives you the information that they need to enter regarding tax code, pay and tax. And there's also a part 3 that the new employer keeps. It used to be sent off to the local tax office, but this information now gets included in the full payment submission. So all 3 pages are printed out from your software. They are given to the leaver, and they then take parts 2 and 3 to their new employer, who would then set them up with a new employment. So all I need to do, having printed that P45, is click Finish. Again, I've got that warning about the outstanding attachment, so I'll make sure I get onto that. And we can see that the current status now shows leaver, and it means that this employee will be excluded from any future pay run. Another quick tip, if you want to filter leavers out of your list, if you don't want to see the leavers next time you run a payroll, you can go into criteria, and in the exclusion options at the bottom, you can tick the box to hide current year leavers. And if you ever need to bring them back to view their details, you can always untick that box. That will then put them back in the list. So now that we've dealt with leavers, there's essentially one final task for us to run in the payroll process. That is our full payment submission, also available from the payroll tasks. And this notifies HMRC that we've paid the staff and gives details of any starters or leavers that we need to tell them about in this pay run. So I'm going to click on the option now to submit my full payment submission. You might see a checklist of tasks you should have completed already. So have a read through that. Once you're used to it, you can tick the box not to show that checklist again. You won't see this message. This is only because I'm in a chaining room. So I'm just going to click past that. But you will see the full payment submission screen that appears, given the option to continue with the submission. So it then asks you to check your details. This is the government gateway, user ID and password, and company details that you're submitting for. When you click submit, it then gives a bit of a summary of the information you're about to submit. So each employee's name is listed, the tax period the submission relates to, the total liability for that employee, so that's the tax, the NI contributions and any student loan repayments, broken down by employee. And then we can also see leaving dates and start dates for anyone that has left or joined us. It calculates a total liability based on these particular employees, and that's going to form part of what we need to pay to HMRC come the end of the month. So we're happy with all of this. I'm going to click submit, and you would usually see a progress bar move across the screen. It repeats every 10 seconds if the gateway is busy. And once a submission has been made, you get this message: submission was successful, and an option to view and print a submission log, which is also stored within your software from the e-submissions tasks. So I'm just going to close out of this screen, and you will now see that the last FPS date has also updated to display my January pay date, and that confirms that the pay run is complete for these monthly paid employees and that HMRC have been sent the relevant information. Now, if for some reason you need to drill down into the information that was submitted to HMRC, there are some handy tools to do that. You can go to the e-submissions tasks and you can check out the FPS viewer. And then if you go to the last entry in the list, it actually gives you the main columns of information that has been submitted, but you can switch on any additional column that you want to report on. You can print the details, you can export them to Excel, you can check out things like total liability. So sometimes comes in useful if you have to do any reconciling. Thought I'd mention that the FPS viewer is available just there. So a quick recap of that before we cover month end. So we've got about five or 10 minutes left. So full say FPS contains starter and leaver details, each employee that was paid during the pay run, the payment and deductions, and the liability made up of tax, NI, and student loan contributions. And you must send this on or before your employee's pay date. If you make late submissions, you may be liable to pay penalties. So that's the pay run complete. Just a quick reminder of that guidance from HMRC. Just make sure we've covered those 5 steps. So we recorded the pay using the enter payments routine with our various pay elements. We then had the deductions calculated automatically for tax, national insurance, and pension, as well as the employer NI contribution, which can be viewed on the payment summary part 2 report, just one of those recommended reports I showed you earlier. You can produce payslips, printed, uploaded, or emailed from the software. And we saw just then submitting an FPS, just a few clicks, and that is sent direct from your software. So a few tasks to complete at the end of the month, which I will quickly run through now. So month end in payroll world is the 5th of the month. The tax year begins on the 6th of April. So each tax month runs from the 6th until the 5th of the following month. If you run a monthly payroll where everyone has the same pay date, it's pretty simple. Once you've completed that pay run, you can then complete month end. But if you have a weekly, fortnightly, or 4-weekly payroll, it is important that you complete all pay dates within the tax month before you go through this month end process. So 3 tasks essentially involved. There's the P32 report, which will give you a breakdown of your liabilities, and it will tell you how much you need to pay to HMRC. There's an EPS submission, which is only required in specific circumstances. And then you need to make your payment to HMRC by the 22nd of the following month if you pay electronically, or the 19th of the month if you pay by post. So this P32 report used to be part of the kind of paying in book that you got, but these days most payments are done electronically, and it really breaks down your bill to HMRC each month by adding together all of the income tax, student loans, and national insurance contributions for each employee, deducting any employment allowance that you're claiming if you haven't claimed at all, and any statutory payments you've recovered, and then adding on apprenticeship levy for those larger businesses that pay that to give you an amount due to HMRC. So most of the items, the tax, student loan, and NI, is submitted as part of your FPS. So that's how HMRC get the information to work out your liability. But there are some things that require another submission. That's employment allowance, apprenticeship levy, and statutory payments recovered. And that is submitted as an EPS either at the start of the tax year for employment allowance or at the end of each month for statutory pay and apprenticeship levy. So I'm going to show you how to run a P32 report. I'm also going to show you the EPS, and then we'll finish off the presentation with a quick flowchart around when you do need to send an EPS and when you don't. So back over to Sage Payroll to complete this demo. I'm running a monthly payroll, so it's all pretty straightforward. I've done my January payroll, so I'm ready to run month end. A few places I can find the P32 report. In the payroll links, there is a link directly to the P32 report, so you could run it from there. Or you could go to this main reports option above the employee list. I've added it to my favorites, Form P32 Employer Payment Record, but you find it in the period end folder. And it's this one here, Form P32 Employer Payment Record. So again, I'll double click to preview it. And we'll need to specify the tax month that we're running the report for. January is tax month 10, as the tax year begins in April. So tax month between 10 and 10 will give us our P32 for January. Just going to zoom in. You can see it itemizes the PAYE income tax and any student or postgraduate loan deductions to give us what it calls the net income tax figure. Then gives us the gross national insurance, that's the employee and employer contribution. Any employment allowance that we still have to claim, and actually we've claimed it all in this example. And then other adjustments, which in our case is the SMP we've recovered this month, which as a standard employer is 92% of the amount that was paid. So further down the report, you can see total NIC deductions, gives us a net national insurance figure. Any apprenticeship levy, if it applies to your businesses, a record of the employer NI that is payable this month, and at the bottom here, this is the key value, the total amount due. So £2,209.74. Now, if you think back to the FPS, the liability on that was about 3,100, something like that, might have been a bit more. The reason the amount due is less is that we have recovered SMP. We're claiming back £1,242 in SMP. And it does mean, because we have a value in box 16, we've got an adjustment, we do need to submit an EPS at the end of the month. Otherwise, HMRC will be expecting us to pay this full amount. So this is the payment we're going to make. Again, we can export that as a PDF or print it out. Once you've run the P32, if you go into your company settings, it updates the HMRC payments tab. So for month 10, this was our amount due. We can also see our employment allowance was claimed between months 1 and 5, and that's why we've got nothing else to claim for the rest of the year. So we know how much we need to pay. Final thing we're going to do is send the EPS. So that can either be done, again, from the payroll links. You've got employer payment summary, or I'm going to do it from the e-submissions tasks. Employer payment summary. The reason we're sending this is we're adjusting a payment because we've recovered statutory pay. So this first option here. And then we just run through this wizard, confirming the tax month. This is the amount reclaimed for the tax year to date. So this will display the cumulative value next month. It's the first reclaim we've made this year. You can manually enter CIS deductions suffered if that applies to you. You'll know if it does. And then any calculated apprenticeship levy values are displayed just here. So we can finish the wizard. You won't see that warning. We then submit the EPS, and that will update our online account with the amount we've recovered. so that HMRC know how much we're going to pay them. And again, e-submissions log, if you need to look back on the EPS, is where you can find all the details, including the values that were included in that submission. Right, so that is about it. This flowchart is in the slides. If you wanted to download it, it's just sort of a flow to tell you whether you need to do an EPS. So have you paid your employees this month? If not, send an EPS to inform HMRC that no payment is due. And then have you recovered statutory pay, CIS deduction suffered, or paid apprenticeship levy? If so, send your EPS. If not, you don't need to submit it. So everything you've already sent in your FPS makes up your liability. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. A quick recap of the steps we've took you through today. There was preparing to process, creating the new starters, adding absences, among other things. We went through the enter payments routine, and we had a quick look at the pension assessment. We saw how to produce payslips and reports. We updated the records and then ran the lever wizard. We did our FPS submission, and we finished there with the month-end tasks. So it has been pretty quiet in the chat today. If you do have questions that you've been saving up for me, I'm happy to stay online for the next 5 or 10 minutes to answer those for you. But before you go, I'd like to tell you about some further support that is available from Sage University and from our Help Centre. So Sage U contains some free e-learning courses which you can access by simply creating a login for Sage U at sageu.com and then accessing the Payroll Learning Path, which you can access directly from this link. You'll be able to work through the stages of our e-learning courses. You can even do the certification, and there's various bite-sized learning available as well. So really useful resource. We've made it free of charge to support customers during the pandemic. So do check that out at sageu.com. And for further support, you can access our Help Centre, either using the in-product link or going to sage.co.uk/help. You can search our knowledge base, check what's trending, read our how-to guides. There's more links to videos and training and contact options, including our Sage Q&A live service, which is a great way of getting a quick answer to your question. So thanks so much for joining me today and yesterday, if you came along to that one. I hope you found these sessions useful. But in the absence of any final questions, we're going to call it a day there. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care. Maybe I'll see you at a webinar soon.